is CNN Breaking News.
Bianca Golodriga, Brian Lanza, Anna Navarro, Jason Miller, Brian Fallon, and Matt Lewis as well. Anna, how do you see this? I mean, what do you make of these Donald Trump Jr.'s in communication with an unknown person at WikiLeaks and confiding in that person?
It just once again makes you ask the question, what does Mueller know that we still don't know? Because every single day another shoe seems to drop. Going back to your point, it becomes harder to justify that Don Jr. did not tell his father about that meeting with Natalia Veselnitskaya at Trump Tower. Donald Trump was in Trump Tower that same day that the meeting had occurred. Remember, the president said, I didn't know anything about this meeting. I wasn't aware of it. The fact that he tweeted 15 minutes after his son got that tweet makes people question whether or not that was accurate. Also, remember, WikiLeaks came across as an objective news site. We got from these DMs, direct messages with Don Jr., that WikiLeaks specifically said, here's an idea. Why doesn't your dad release some of his tax returns through us so that we can put it out and look like we're not just pushing Hillary Clinton stuff, that we're also against both candidates at times. So there you get to see once and for all that they were actually promoting
contacts Donald Trump Jr. after the news of the Russian Kremlin lawyer meeting breaks, saying, oh, hey, I'm sorry for what you're going through. Why don't you give us your emails? We'll put them out.
Right.
And that'll help us. It'll make us look more credible. And Donald Trump Jr. ignores that, but then decides to release those emails.
Exactly. And also, what I would really focus on as well is how quickly the vice president's office responded. Remember, back in June, he hired his own personal attorney.
What is this, the second time he's actually said something that's not true?
But within an hour, you hear a response from him. Clearly, they're taking this seriously. He has his own attorney that he hired back in June with regards to any matters related to the Russia investigation. So he's taking this seriously. We're just waiting to hear from the president to respond as well.
Brian, I mean, was this smart for Donald Trump Jr. to be in communications with unknown people at WikiLeaks?
I would say this. I said we're talking a lot about speculation. We're saying if he did this, then he must have done this potentially. Let's wait for the facts to bear out. I think it's important for Mueller to conduct.
Right, but what we know is he was in communication. Was that smart?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not. I wasn't in communication. It's something I would have sort of informed people in the campaign. Hey, I got this anonymous email from this anonymous direct
message. Which he did. He actually sent out the email to people in the campaign, and it just continued.
Well, the communication is going to continue, but it doesn't show that Don was proactive in what was being sent to him. You said, hey, they sent this link, and then 2 days later he retweets the link. That's not a direct link. That's
no, but he sends out to Kellyanne Conway, Steve Bannon, Jared Kushner, who then sends it to Hope Hicks. Hey, WikiLeaks reach out to me.
I mean, that's the process. You want to disclose when somebody sort of comes forward with, information that might be useful or information that's suspect. You want to vet that stuff. So it shows that the campaign actually did have a vetting process when it came to this information.
But no one called the FBI. That's their vetting campaign?
I mean,
they have to question their judgment.
Well, you have to question the information that came in, but you also have to acknowledge the fact that Don did the right thing and reach out to senior management and said, hey, these people are reaching out to me, and then the senior management has to take the role from there. And you'd have to sort of back with it.
Right, but Don, he continued to communicate with them.
Well, he was communicating events of news of the day, so you're not going to ignore those news of the day. That link, that conversation about that link, that had been in the day for 2 days already. That had been in the news for 2 days. And finally, after 2 days, he discloses something. He's not going to disclose what's in the common thread of the conversation.
Brian, you've worked on campaigns. Does this make sense to you?
Well, I think Democrats need to maintain perspective. One damning revelation does not a criminal case make, just like the revelation in June about the June 2016 Trump Tower meeting also by itself is not going to produce an indictment. But these are all bad facts. The bad facts are all piling up. The territory available for Trump defenders to make a case is shrinking by the day. And this is another clear indication of the Trump campaign's willingness to collude. He's eager, Donald Trump Jr. is, to engage in this direct message chain with WikiLeaks. It's clearly influencing the campaign's actions. Donald Trump Jr. is basically taking orders about his Twitter activity in terms of tweeting out links at Julian Assange's direction, not to mention the candidate himself touting WikiLeaks the day in the moments after this tweet was received. And it widens the circle of people that were potentially implicated in this based on the fact that in September, Donald Trump Jr. tells the high command of the campaign he has an active line of communication with WikiLeaks. So all those people, I suspect they've already been brought into the grand jury or given a voluntary interview already, but if they hadn't, they're now all implicated. The circle is widened. So the more of these bad facts that come out, they're only incriminating, not exculpatory, and in many ways they contradict past statements that the campaign officials have made, which suggests that they have a lot to hide.
Jason, I mean, does it feel to you like every now and then we learn more and more about emails and communications that Donald Trump Jr. had? I mean, it makes me wonder, with Mueller, who has access to all the emails he sent during the campaign, what else there might be.
Well, I feel like we're viewing everything that happened in 2016 through a 2017 lens. And when we're talking about these dates, I mean, there was a lot of back and forth and people weren't sure who exactly was behind the WikiLeaks. And one of the things to keep in mind, to defend Don Jr. for a minute here, you get an outreach from WikiLeaks. Okay, these guys clearly have a lot of tactics and techniques that they're using online. You don't want to go and piss these guys off. And so you wouldn't want to go and necessarily blow them off like, hey, fine, off the record, I'll check, just kind of a, placate them and play nice. Why would you go and pick a fight with WikiLeaks at that moment when you know that they're involved with all this stuff? The other thing, too, when, to be honest, point about going to the FBI, at that point in the campaign, the only thing that we had seen with the FBI is that they were basically, and from the view of the campaign, it really seemed like they were in Secretary Clinton's pocket. I mean, there was everything that happened with the FBI and with the DOJ, with Loretta Lynch. I mean, that didn't exactly seem like the safest place to go. So,
right. But I mean, I'm on Twitter and I get direct messages from people I don't know. You don't have to respond. Like, you don't have to. I mean, I'm sure some nice people or some nasty people have reached out to me. You can just ignore them. Like, there's no. If you get an email from WikiLeaks and you're not a reporter, you're on a campaign, and there's this stuff floating out there. I mean, it's not an obligation. I know you're saying maybe he's afraid of WikiLeaks, but like he didn't have to respond at the beginning. He could just pretend, sorry, WikiLeaks, I never got your direct message.
He can unfollow them, and then he can't.
He could mute them. I mean,
At one point, he reached out and said, "What is this news of a potential leak I'm hearing about?" He was soliciting information, so it went beyond just trying to avoid pissing him off.
They were pinging him several times, and even into 2017. I mean, it didn't seem like a relationship that he was trying to develop or he was trying to foster. And again, through all of this, there's nothing that Don Jr. did illegal here. I mean, I'm not seeing anything that was at all illegal. I mean, and I haven't heard any of the panelists or any of the experts that have come on. And so it really seems like Don Jr. is getting unfairly beaten up here.
You would want a guy running an international business to be responding to anonymous people who are direct messaging him and telling them, oh, this conversation's off the record? I mean, for a guy who's an international businessman, that just seems, I mean, again, I know nothing about business. I could not run the corporation he runs. That just seems moronic to me.
But that goes to your earlier point that I think a lot of people viewed them as some sort of news agency or thought that maybe they viewed themselves as a news agency. Otherwise, that's why he...
Let me tell you how Republicans viewed Julian Assange. They viewed him as a traitor. Right. They viewed him as a national security threat.
He's hiding out in the embassy of Ecuador.
Right.
Right.
And when this is the part that bothered me the most, right? Because what we know about Russia is that they're trying to tear America apart about race, everything. They want to drive us apart. And the part where they direct message Don Jr. and they say, if your dad loses, it would be nice if he didn't concede, if he challenged the media and other types, saying that the game was rigged. So what they're trying to do, I don't know, it's like Russian cutout. I don't know how directly involved Russia is here, but it really seems like this could have been very bad for America if Trump lost and refused to concede. It would have torn the country apart even more.
We got to take a break. We're going to continue this discussion with the panel. Later, the growing calls from Washington Republicans for their Senate candidate in Alabama, Roy Moore, to leave the race. A new accuser has come forward with serious allegations of sexual misconduct. You'll hear from her ahead, and the candidate is responding. Julian Assange has weighed in on the breaking news, direct messages between Donald Trump Jr. and WikiLeaks during the campaign. Assange tweeted, I cannot confirm the alleged DMs from Donald J. Trump Jr. to WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks does not keep such records, and the Atlantic's presentation is edited and clearly does not have the full context. However, even those published by the Atlantic show that, 1, WikiLeaks loves its pending publications and ignores those who ask for details. Trump Jr. was rebuffed, just like Cambridge Analytica. In both cases, WikiLeaks had publicly teased the publications. Thousands of people asked about them. Assange goes on. Number 2, WikiLeaks can be very effective at convincing even high-profile people that it is their interest to promote links to its publications. Back now with the panel. Anna, how do you see this?
That's surreal. I mean, honest to goodness, it's the kind of stuff that you just say to yourself, can we be in reality here? You can't make this stuff up. First of all, I think it's no coincidence that it is Donald Trump Jr. they're going after again, right? He is the weakest link. He is also the one that the Russian lawyer contacted to say, hey, I got dirt that we can share with you. There's obviously, a sense that we're dealing with Tweedledum. The way that they talk to him, hiya. We got something to tell you. The simpleton, the simple ways that they talk, the language says that they thought going after Trump Jr. was an effective phishing mechanism, and it worked. I think the overwhelming amount of circumstantial evidence means that you really have to suspend disbelief in order to think that there is no connection going on here. And look, it goes back to the point that this mushroom cloud keeps growing and growing and growing, and it's not going away. And at some point, Bob Mueller's going to come out with the facts.
Brian?
I mean, I would say this. You know, less than 2 weeks ago, you had Senator Feinstein, who's the former chair of the intelligence community, asked by this network, did she see any collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia? And her answer was no. And so what we have is a lot of conjecture. We have a lot of sloppiness on the campaign, at least perceived sloppiness. But when we have one of the top intelligence persons of the Democratic Party that says she sees no collusion, I tend to believe her. It's a lot of noise. You know, a lot of mistakes were made, but nothing to the point where it's criminal, and certainly nothing to the point that a Democratic senator, former chair of the intelligence community, sees collusion. I think that's powerful, and that gets lost every day in this conversation.
Look, I thought David Frum made a powerful point in the last hour with you, where he said it's going to become harder and harder for WikiLeaks to justify itself as a credible news organization. I mean, you see from what they laid out in the DMs that they were, in fact, rooting for Donald Trump. They were giving him advice as to what to do so that they would look more objective and maybe dish on both sides. And throughout all of this, WikiLeaks said that they had not taken or colluded or been involved with Russia at all in pushing forward any emails. It's harder and harder to justify them and take them seriously, given what we've now seen.
If email, I mean, during the campaign, emails forwarded to Hope Hicks, is that, I mean, she was with candidate Trump all the time. I mean, wasn't she, I mean, she and when Lewandowski was running the campaign, every time, the few times I happened to go there to do interviews, it would be the candidate, Corey Lewandowski, and Hope Hicks. I mean, they were a pretty tight bunch. So if you're sending emails to Hope Hicks, is that in order to get an email to candidate Trump at the time?
Well, frequently Hope would be traveling with the president, but I don't know on that particular day where people were, or if that was to give her a heads up in case there was immediate inquiry or something like that. So not something I've discussed with them, but I think going back to a point that Brian made a moment ago, where we're talking about a lot of conjecture over the past couple of weeks here, it's even more than the past couple of weeks. I mean, over this past year or so, that there's been this investigation into this so-called collusion between the campaign and a foreign entity. There still is no proof that anyone on the campaign was colluding.
But now Mike Pence has come out twice. He's been trotted out to be like the kindly face of this and say, gosh, darn, there was absolutely no, I can't believe this is just the media going after this thing, going down a rabbit hole. And now, an hour later, you know, once this thing is revealed, comes out saying, well, we actually had no idea about this report. We just learned about it from this report. Apparently, they believe this report because they're responding to it and are taking it seriously. I mean,
let's not forget,
it's not good for Mike Pence.
And given how little we do know about the Bob Mueller probe, we do know at least that there's at least one guilty plea and one cooperator already helping the federal investigators working this case. They've already succeeded, based on the evidence that they revealed from that guilty plea, in pegging the timeline in terms of when the Trump campaign first knew that the Russians were offering help back to April. So that opens up all kinds of possibilities of what may unfold itself over the ensuing months. I think that there's plenty of evidence to believe the White House at least perceives an increasing threat. You have, late tonight we're learning that Jeff Sessions is considering appointing a special prosecutor to investigate that phony Uranium One controversy, to potentially try to distract and fire up the fog machine. You had, to connect it to the other big news of the day today, Roy Moore, you have the White House itself, two White House officials floating the possibility of Jeff Sessions retaking his Senate seat. I think that I can't imagine that part of the motive there is not to try to get Jeff Sessions out of DOJ, bring a new Attorney General in there who could potentially disrupt the Mueller investigation.
Well, let's go to our next.
This is CNN Breaking News.
State Representative Henry joins us now. Thanks so much for being with us. I appreciate it. You believe Roy Moore, clearly. You do not believe these women. And I want to read the quote of what you said today in an interview with, or maybe late last night with AL.
Hold on a second, Anderson.
Yeah.
Hold on a second. Do you mind? You just gave the quote, so
Well, actually, let me give the full.
you up real quick.
Let me just give you the full quote here.
You're not going to give the full quote because you don't know the full quote. You're going to read what was printed, right?
Well, from AL.com, let me read what was
That's
printed.
not the.
Let me read. If these women were for 40 years, had protected a sexual predator, they should be accomplices to whatever crimes have been committed. If you know somebody murdered somebody 40 years ago and you didn't say anything about it, you should be an accomplice to that crime. You have helped cover it up. You have helped keep it from going.
Absolutely. Why? See, and this is there's two different things we're talking about, and both of these are in conversations about just the greater world of in which we live. And if you are going to basically protect by your silence a crime, then you're part of that. And what the conversation was really around was the things like the Bill Cosby event or the incidents where he had molested women, paid them to be quiet, went and molested other women, paid them to be quiet, and so on and so forth. And both of these were lengthy conversations.
I got to say, though,
and
it
if
sounds
you're
like
going to protect,
it sounds like you're
if
saying
you're going
that
to
victims of
protect
sexual
somebody,
assault
then
should be
you're part of
accomplices.
it.
So you're saying victims of
If
sexual
you
assault
are part
are accomplices?
if you are part of silencing and keeping silence a crime, then you are culpable. You
So
are
children
part
who
of
have been
that.
raped
You
by
are-
a priest and never came forward about it, they should be pursued as accomplices to the
That's
rape?
not what we're talking about.
Well,
That's not
we're
what
talking about sexual assault
Anderson.
of a child.
No, what I was talking about were those instances, that specific instance. What you and a lot of the left would like to say is, oh, because he made this one statement, it applies to everything that he believes, and it's just not true.
Well, no, that's why we're having you on,
If you
'cause we
are
really
a
want you to explain
pedophile
yourself.
and you are taking advantage of children, and I hear about it, know about it, trust full well there will be hell to pay if
Yeah,
I
I
can
have no
say
doubt
that on
about that.
CNN.
Of course, I have no doubt about that.
It-
But it does seem, and again, that's why we want you on, and I know you wanted to explain your comments because you got a lot of criticism for it. It does seem like you're saying in this particular case, this was allegedly a 14-year-old girl who had a sexual encounter with Mr. Moore when he was 32 years old.
Supposedly, right?
Yeah, supposedly.
I mean, that's your
But you're
comment
saying
is supposedly, right?
But you're saying, yes, allegedly. If this is true, you're saying she is as culpable as him because she didn't come forward for 40 years, if it's true?
No. And that's where the disconnect is. We were talking more along the lines of just in theory of people who are quiet about things that know are responsible. And it is disingenuous, in my opinion, for 50-something-year-old women to come forward 4 weeks prior to a major senatorial election. You know, it was one of the most 100 most powerful people in the world that we're going to elect in 4 weeks. And 4 weeks out, we have these allegations, that no one in Alabama has heard about. It surfaces. It just reeks of politics. And this is what it really does. This is what kind of bothers me the most, I think, because it actually detracts from actual victims, people who have been molested, who have been assaulted. By
you don't know that this
politicizing this
14-year-old
the way they have,
But you
it
don't
is
know-
going
you don't know
to
what happened.
further quiet anybody that has truly been assaulted, and that's the problem.
Well,
and I
actually,
don't know,
isn't the
and
thing that's going to
nobody
quiet
knows.
people?
You don't know,
well,
Anderson.
Excuse me, sir. Isn't
you
what,
have no
isn't-
idea
right, nor
what
do
the
you,
truth
sir.
is.
Nor,
You have no
nor
idea.
do you. Nor
right?
do you. You're taking a stand
Well, what I
based
have,
on no information.
What I have is at least I know one of the individuals, right? Do you know any of them?
No, I don't.
Do you know any of them? Have you
No, I
ever
don't.
sat down and
You're
had
telling
a
me
personal
because you've spent
conversation
some
with
time
any-
with Judge
then
Moore,
I
you can
have
tell
had
if he
a
likes little
personal
girls.
conversation. And if I look at what I know of Roy Moore, who is a stalwart in conservative principles, a man who says what he means and means what he says and is willing to die for his country, and I look at the face of the facts on this, that all of a sudden, after 40 years supposedly, these women are going to come forward 4 weeks out from a senatorial election. It reeks. It smells horrible.
I understand you
to me,
Okay.
and I am making the decision personally that I do not believe them.
Okay. In another interview, though, because this wasn't just one interview that you gave, that was with AL.com, with the Coleman Times, you said, if they believe this man is predatory, they are guilty of allowing him to exist for 40 years. I think someone should prosecute and go after them. That's not hypothetical. You were talking about
and here's
these
the thing. Here's
women,
the thing.
yes?
So I had offered to your producer to bring the reporter of the Coleman Times on the show with me tonight and let him explain to you the entire conversation, because that's not what we were talking about. It's not. He didn't portray it the way that it is being taken by you and many of the people on the left. I mean, what amazes me is how many hate mongers there are out there on the left.
I'm just reading your
The
quote.
left
Are you saying that
pretends
quote
to
is
be
not correct?
A flower child, oh, we love peace and everybody, until you say something they don't like, and then they're willing to kill you. And that's scary.
Are you
and that's
saying
the
the
world
quote is
we
not
live
correct?
in, and part of it is because of things like this, where you and others like you are going to try and demagogue.
Well, I don't know who others like me are. I don't know what you're indicating, but I've invited you on. I'm allowing you to speak freely, and I'm questioning you about quotes that you yourself have given in multiple interviews. I understand you're under pressure from this, and you're backtracking from
Look,
it.
I'm not.
And that's fine.
I'm telling you, the quote is being misconstrued.
Okay, so you're not saying
at
that
best.
any of these women should be prosecuted because they remain silent, and you're not saying that they are accomplices.
No.
That if they
No.
stayed silent, you're not saying they're accomplices.
No.
Okay, fair enough.
That was not the context of the conversation.
Okay. You say that you consider.
I realize that, and now the reporter realizes that was the way it was taken, but that's not what was.
Okay,
the
because
way
it was actually in 2 interviews, so it's not just one reporter. You consider, though, you said Roy Moore to be a victim. Is that correct?
Yes, I think in these types of instances, you have an accuser and an accused, and I think probably more often than not, the accuser is the victim. But I do believe occasionally the accused is the victim. And I believe in this instance that Roy Moore is the victim. I believe he is the victim of a political hack job. And who's behind it, I don't know. I have no idea who paid for all of this and who will be paying for it in weeks to come.
So you think
but
somebody
I believe
is.
Roy Moore is the victim.
The Washington Post says that neither Ms. Korfman nor any of the other women actually sought out the paper, that they spent a long time in Alabama investigating this. They have dozens of interviews with people, and that all these women were initially reluctant to speak out. Ms. Korfman made it clear to the Post that she's actually voted Republican in the past 3 presidential elections, including for Donald Trump in 2016. I'm wondering what evidence you have that this was politically motivated, or is it just a gut feeling?
Anderson, how many weeks until the Senate election, senatorial election?
That
Do you know?
Yeah, it's a couple of weeks. It's 4 weeks away. So,
All right, less than 4 weeks.
Okay.
And so all of a sudden, after 40 years, and this is not, Roy Moore is not a guy that's been hiding in the shadows for the last 40 years doing nothing. This guy has been on the front line. Every single leftist group out there hates him. There are people within the right part of the side of the party, the establishment, they hate Roy Moore. I know for a fact if this had been anywhere out there, if he had anything like this in his past, it would have come out by now. And here we are, right before a huge election with national implications between a Republican and a Democrat. All of a sudden, this is front page news. This is headline news.
So do you think the Washington
And
Post is
I'm not
is
buying it.
paying
It
these
is
people?
political. It is political at every level.
But are you saying that the Washington Post reporters are they are paying these people? Or are you saying this is some sort of liberal plot?
I
that they
don't know. I
ensnare the
think
Washington
I don't
Post?
know who's behind it. I do not know who's behind it, but it is absolutely political.
'Cause you
There
talked
is
about-
only
You talked about the difficulty of women coming forward, and you're concerned that this would, any false allegations make it harder for people to make real allegations to come forward.
Absolutely.
Certainly,
Absolutely.
labeling these women as somehow politically motivated or looking for money or whatever it is, doesn't that
I
also
didn't
make
label them that. They labeled themselves that by being used. If in fact they are, they labeled themselves that by being used in this political process. That is the only reason this is coming out,
Unless
is to
what they're saying is actually
suppress
true.
voters on the Republican ticket on December the 12th. It is entirely the only outcome is to suppress voters. That's all this is. It's voter suppression.
There have been some people who've said that if Moore did this with a 14-year-old girl, that it was a long time ago, and that they would still vote for him. And just to be clear, if Roy Moore did these things, and I know you categorically do not believe he did, do you think he should resign? He said to Sean Hannity today, anybody who did that to a 14-year-old girl should not serve in the Senate.
I think anybody that tries to answer the question, if something, is a fool.
I don't understand.
That's the way your question should be. Look, if anything happened, my grandfather used to have a nice quib about a frog and if he had wings. But here's the thing. frog doesn't have wings, and so for you to comment on it makes you as foolish as the question.
Well, I guess Roy Moore is foolish because he
The real
commented on it
question
today
is
when Sean
this.
Hannity asked him that
The
same
real
question. So
question is this.
Okay,
The
I'm
real
just asking you the
is,
question
do
that
you
Sean
believe
Hannity asked.
Roy Moore, or do you believe the women? And you believe the women. I get that.
No,
I
I'm
mean,
not saying
it's obvious
it's not
from
my
your
job
tone.
to judge
I
who's
believe
telling
Roy
the truth or
Moore.
not. There's just numbers of people on the record in interviews with the Washington Post. So I'm not taking a position on this. I'm just asking you questions. And I don't think it's a crazy question to ask.
I would say
if somebody
that your
did this,
questions
do
are
you think they
definitely
deserve? If somebody
have a tone to them.
if somebody did this, do you believe that they should serve in the United States Senate? I assume you would say no.
I would say this: anyone who molests a child, male or female, needs to be prosecuted. Period.
Do you think you're a good reader of the politics of the situation? Do you think, if this is a plot by liberals or whomever you think it is, do you think it's going to have the desired impact, or do you think it's it's very possible this is going to rally more people around Judge Moore because they feel this is
It will.
to your
It will
point?
do a little of both. You're right on that. It will do a little of both. I think you'll probably see a greater suppression of the vote than a rally of the base. I think you'll see there will be enough people out there that once that feather goes out of misconduct, whatever it be, there'll be enough people that will just hear enough of the news because they're not attuned to it like you or myself, and they will stay home. They just won't go vote.
Just lastly,
because that's really all this is about voter suppression.
Just lastly, to the two senators, Mike Lee of Utah and Steve Daines of Montana, who withdrew their endorsements of Moore tonight, what would you say to them and others who may be thinking or trying to figure out what they should do?
It's sad that we have that many cowards in Washington, D.C. They are going to allow, and maybe they just don't know Roy Moore well enough. And if that's the case, they shouldn't have ever endorsed him to begin with or being considered to endorse him. But if you really believe that this is a good man, and you're going to allow simply the allegation, no evidence, no corroboration, then, and you're going to withdraw your support and you're an elected official, then I feel you're a coward.
There were a number of people, according to the Washington Post reporting, there were a number of people who these women talked to around the time of this. So it's not as if nobody was ever informed. They didn't go public.
What did they
with
say, Anderson?
The mother of the 14-year-old girl remembers Roy Moore coming up to her. She said things to friends at the time that she was seeing an older man, I believe. That there were other people who were told, other people who were interviewed. It doesn't raise any questions for you?
The things that the other ladies said were, they were just extremely vague, and while they would love to say something, there just isn't anything there to say.
Yeah, I've been really focusing on the 14-year-old girl.
Anderson.
Okay,
I do not buy it.
I've been focusing more on the 14-year-old girl because the statute of, the age of consent is 16. These other people, these other women were, they were teenagers, but they were above the age of consent. So for me, I think the main gist of that article was focusing on the 14-year-old.
Right, and that is really where the article is completely gotten most of its feet, because without the 14-year-old, no one would have run the story, and so you get this, and it's the funny thing is it's really not talking about a 14-year-old. We're talking about a 50-year-old person today telling a story 40 years ago.
Well, one of the other women does say
people that are
that
older than that trying to tell a story as how they recall an interaction that happened 40 years ago.
Should also point out one of the other women did say that when she was 14.
I remember a little bit, but not a lot of details.
One of the other women, I should point out, did say that Roy Moore approached her when she was 14 years old, when she was a Santa's helper in the mall. It wasn't until she was 16 that he actually asked her out on a date, and they went out for several months. Actually, no, it was her mother.
That is her statement to the Washington Post. I do not discount that's her statement.
Yeah. Well, Representative Henry,
I don't believe it.
I appreciate you being on tonight. I hope you feel we gave you a chance to say what you really wanted to say.
Thank you very much, Anderson.
All right. Thank you very much. There's more breaking news tonight. New CNN polling shows declines in President Trump's approval ratings 1 year to the day after he won the 2016 presidential election. 64% of Americans now say their confidence in President Trump since he took office has decreased. Only 40% of Americans say President Trump is doing a good job keeping his campaign promises. That's down from 48% back in April. The new poll also asked how other countries view President Trump. Only 24% of Americans think foreign leaders respect the president, a big drop from 36% in April. And finally, 68% of Americans do not trust most of what they hear from the White House. These new poll results back up what we saw last night as Democrats swept statewide and local elections around the country in what Democrats and some Republicans are calling a referendum on the president. I spoke earlier about it with Vermont Independent Senator and former Democratic presidential candidate Bernie Sanders. Senator, the election yesterday, obviously a good day for Democrats. I wonder what lessons you take away from that and what lessons you think the party should take away from it.
Well, first thought, I think yesterday's elections were really a referendum on the disastrous Trump administration, on his temperament, on his reactionary policies. It was a referendum on Trump and the Republicans lost. The American people from coast to coast are frightened of this president, and they are tired of seeing the billionaire class get their way. So I think it was a good night for Democrats. The other point that I would make, Anderson, is that what impressed me is not just winning governor's races in New Jersey or in Virginia, but the kind of grassroots activism we saw all over this country. Probably the most interesting aspect of last night in Virginia was the fact that the Democrats may control the House of Delegates, winning, I think, some 17 or 18 seats. And those seats were won often by young people, people who had not ever been involved in the political process, and they got involved, and in many cases they won. And you're seeing that all over this country. And to me, that is the most important thing the Democratic Party can now do. Open the doors, bring people in, and when they come in with the energy and the idealism that they have, you're going to see voter turnout go up, and you're going to see Democrats win across the board.
Yeah, that's something Van Jones talked about on our air last night as well. But, you know, a lot of people point to the fact that Governor like Northam is a center-right candidate, someone who voted for George W. Bush twice. Is that the kind of candidate Democrats need to be fielding in order to be competitive?
Well, obviously, in that case, I personally supported a fellow named Tom Perriello in the Democratic primary, and I thought Tom would have been a great candidate and a great governor. But the people in the Democratic primary thought otherwise. Our job now is to come together to defeat Republicans and to move this country in a very different way.
You talked about this being a referendum on the president. In Virginia, white working class voters in rural areas again voted overwhelmingly for Republicans. Are Democrats doing enough to reach out to those voters? They were obviously integral to Trump's win.
I think we've got to move forward on all fronts. In other words, this is not black versus white versus Latino. The African American community, Latino community have particular, very legitimate needs that have to be addressed. But every working person in this country is concerned about the outsourcing of jobs to Mexico and to China. Every worker is concerned about how he or she is going to afford health care. They're concerned about how they're going to afford to send their kids to college, which is why, in my view, we need to make public colleges and universities tuition free. So this is bringing people together around a progressive agenda that says that in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, we don't have to have 40 million people living in poverty. We don't have to see a continuation of the middle class in decline.
You made it clear recently you're not going to run as a Democrat in 2018. You'll run once again as an independent. Does that hurt the Democratic Party? I mean, could it contribute in some way to some of the disarray that we've been seeing? That the de facto leader of the party's progressive wing isn't...
Anderson, let me be very honest and not self-serving in saying the answer to that is no. And that is, we need real reforms in the Democratic Party. And one of the reforms should involve making primaries open, not just limited to registered Democrats, in order to reach out to independents. Right now, Republican Party is at a very, very low level. Democrats are a bit higher than that in terms of public approval. And the largest political grouping in America are now independents. People are not happy with Democrats. They're not happy with Republicans. To say to independents, oh, we don't want you. You're the majority faction in America, but we want to close the doors to you. I think that's politically insane.
I think I know the answer to this, but yeah, I got to ask: if you run for president in 2020, will you run to be the Democratic nominee again, or will you pursue a third-party bid?
No, I would run the same way if I ran. And believe me, I have not made any decision on this yet, but I would run within the Democratic Party process.
The tax bill that Republicans are trying to get through Congress right now, President Trump called into a meeting of moderate Democratic senators, told them, amongst other things, that he'd be a, quote, big loser if this legislation passed as is. I'm wondering what you say to that.
Look, it embarrasses me. I'm not happy to say this. He is the President of the United States, but he lies all of the time. This is just one more lie. Among many other absurd provisions in the tax proposal is the repeal of the estate tax. That repeal would only benefit the top 0.2% of the American people, the very wealthiest people and their families in this country. When Trump tells you that this proposal that he is fighting for will not benefit him and his family, that is totally absurd, and it's just not the truth.
And just lastly, the reporting last week about the agreement the DNC had with the Clinton campaign, Senator Warren said it was proof the primary process was rigged. Donna Brazile, who was the source of this story, now says it wasn't rigged. Let me ask you, in your opinion, was it rigged?
Look, Donna Brazile showed an enormous amount of courage in describing the truth as she saw it when she came into the leadership of the DNC. I don't think there's any sane human being who doesn't believe that my campaign was taking on the entire establishment, including the DNC. But Anderson, to be very honest with you, my job, our job, is to go forward, is to do everything we can to defeat this right-wing agenda of the Republican Party and the Trump administration, not to look backwards.
Senator Sanders, appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Well, the president is in South Korea, but he has just tweeted about the race in the Commonwealth of Virginia. He said, quote, Ed Gillespie worked hard, but did not embrace me or what I stand for. Don't forget, Republicans won 4 out of 4 House seats. With the economy doing record numbers, we will continue to win even bigger than before, exclamation mark. And he's expected to make a speech very shortly. We'll see if he actually mentions this.
That's a short romance.
Might.
Wow, he has your back. He's trying
You said that was a short romance? Yeah, because he did make robocalls over the last 2 days.
Why did he support him and say he was great and crime would be down and he'd be a...
He said there would be no crime.
Oh, right. I forgot.
He
There would
seems
be no...
very focused on his upcoming speech. In the
Yes, exactly.
For any Republican who wonders whether this guy will have your back...
Gloria, I think the president, what you said earlier, right, that Ed Gillespie wasn't out strong in the full force for President Trump during the campaign, didn't help him, didn't lift a finger, and I think Virginia voters didn't forget that. Republican voters didn't forget it, and they didn't show up to support Ed.
So you think he should have embraced the president?
No, I'm just saying that I think that to a large extent, right, you look at those far-flung counties where he's running up 80% of the vote, and I'm just going to say, like in Pennsylvania, that's how we won in Pennsylvania, was all those counties that people had forgotten, 500, 700, 350, all those extra people showing up put the president over. That's what Ed Gillespie needed to do to win Virginia, and he didn't do it.
So he actually got the same turnout in terms of raw numbers that past gubernatorial candidate.
But you can't do that.
What happened was there was a surge of voters in Democratic areas.
Right, you can't do that.
This is if we're drawing lessons from this would make me very uncomfortable if I were a Republican running in 2018, because this is what people fear, that somehow this resistance, as it were, would translate into votes, and it translated into votes today.
And I got to tell you, it was not obvious that would happen. I mean, part of the thing is that when you talk to the actual base, you have a lot of people who sometimes seem like they don't know the difference between tweeting and organizing. There's this whole thing that's happened inside the Democratic Party where there's a lot of social media, there's a lot of complaining, there's a lot of fanning, there's a lot of fainting. It's like, guys, are you knocking on any doors? Are you doing the actual work? And there was a real concern that this thing was just going to be a marching movement, not a voting movement. This thing is becoming a voting movement, and that's a big, big deal in America.
We should also, we're able to report the Democrats are going to win the lieutenant governor in Virginia and the attorney general in Virginia.
And another area to watch, I think, is going to be
history made there in the
lieutenant governor.
So Andrews, just to talk to David, you know, what he needed to do, I wasn't saying that what you need to do in Virginia is play the old handbook the playbook and take it out and dust it off to win. You need to exceed. That's what you have to do in Pennsylvania to win. It's Trump to do for the first time in 30 years. He had to outperform historic numbers in those outlined.
But wasn't the balance for Gillespie that if he did embrace the president too much, it would drive away more?
But that's the problem, right? So Ed Gillespie couldn't be too hot or too cold, right? If he was too hot, the folks in Northern Virginia, Loudon, Fairfax, run the other direction. If he's too cold, the folks in the outlying counties would run the other direction.
He ran the Trump playbook on messaging.
Right.
He treated Northam like he was.
It was Trumpism without Trump.
Trumpism without Trump.
Wait,
He was.
what's
Let me
Steve
finish.
Bannon
He ran as if Northam was supporting pedophiles and he was supporting gangs. Those were his ads. They were very powerful and strong, though they were mean and harsh and nasty. And Northam was on his back most of the race, trying to say, "I don't support pedophiles. I don't support gangs." That was a lot of what he had to say publicly.
And Northam wore a military uniform and was serving the military, went to VMI, was a pretty right-of-center Democrat, and so people were able to see through that.
Senator, I wonder what you think of what David is saying.
Yeah, look, I think this is, you're giving way too much credit to the actual race. I mean, this is not a presidential race that people have on their mind that is really going to drive turnout like you have a presidential race. I think, I hate to say it, but I agree with Axelrod on this one, in that I think there's the fundamental issue here is what's going on in the country, is the base, which base is motivated, and right now, I think it's clear. Dan's right. The Democrats were motivated.
Right. That's what I said, Senator. I said that the folks in the experts in the rural counties didn't show up for Ed.
So let me ask
it's
you.
not Ed's fault. I mean, you're blaming it on Ed, and I just don't think it's Ed's fault. I think the bottom line is Donald Trump is not delivering on what he said he was going to deliver on.
So,
and
Senator,
that's the problem. And he needs to deliver. And if there's a message for Republicans, they better get that message. That they better start passing stuff and looking like they can govern.
So here's my question, and I'll ask it of the two Republicans. Would it have made a difference if Donald Trump had gone to the state of Virginia? Would that have helped Ed Gillespie get over the line?
No,
as the president said.
No. I think just pure demographics, right? The numbers in Virginia, it's a purple, state. Just put it mildly. You look in the DC experts, you're not going to win Loudon, Fairfax. It's no coincidence that Donald Trump golfed at Trump National, right in Virginia, 15 times since Ed Gillespie's been the nominee. But they didn't appear together. They didn't appear together once during those 15 visits to Virginia, so no coincidence.
There are some dangers for Democrats I'd just like to point out, and I'm curious to see if you agree with me on this. It does seem that our response whenever these culturally divisive events become culturally divisive, I don't know a better word for it, when they come up, our response is basically to either duck or call names. And that we don't yet have a good way to talk about sanctuary cities and talk about how they actually are a public safety measure. In other words, if you have a bunch of immigrants who feel like if they call the cops, the deportation police are going to show up, they're not going to call the cops for anything. I don't know if we're defending some of these things adequately. If we think, well, all you have to do is duck or call names, we may be surprised by the strength of some of these cultural issues down the road.
I think that's fair and that's true. I think.
Sorry, the strength of these cultural issues for Democrats?
Against Democrats. In other words, there's a danger
I hope you make those arguments, because I think they're losing arguments. So please engage those arguments.
But I think the challenging, which I bet you agree with me on, one of the challenges we have within the party now is that one of the lessons people have learned from 2016 is that unless you are 100% anti-gun, unless you're 100% for abortion rights, unless you're 100% defending sanctuary cities, you can't be a part of our party. And that's not a winning message or strategy either. So I guess I'm agreeing with you.
So for you, the key for Democrats is tailoring to the state, to the...
I think the key for Democrats is getting out of Washington, D.C., listening to what people are saying in districts and states across the country, figuring out who we are and what we stand for. We can be for health care and equality without saying there have to be these things.
If Tom Perriello had run, this would have been a different race, different tone, different message,
and
different outcome.
He would have lost. He would have lost.
We've got to take a quick break. So far, tonight's election results are not going well for President